Welcome back to the Heal Your Hormones podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Danielle. This month, we are talking all things cycle syncing. And today we are diving into the ovulatory phase. So this is our third episode of the 4-episode series. If you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes where we cover the menstrual phase and the follicular phase, go listen to those first and then come back. But essentially, learning how to sync our lives with our cycle, it'll lead to less hormone symptoms. So more stable mood, better energy, less cramping during your period. These are all things that we want just to feel better overall, but it will also give us more connection and understanding of our bodies and help give us more grace when maybe we don't feel as social or as productive or as motivated as we did last week, right? There's a reason for that, and it's because our hormones are shifting. So it's okay if you don't feel like you're the exact same person today as you were last week, because your hormones are different and physically you're not the same. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that the PCOS pregnancy protocol is now permanently open for enrollment. This is my 6-week program that walks you through the same framework I use with my one-on-one clients to help you heal the root cause of your PCOS so that you can have regular periods and get pregnant naturally. So we talk about, how to eat to balance your blood sugar without restricting food groups or counting calories. We also talk about what testing you should be getting done for your PCOS. Let me tell you, I have never, ever had a patient come to me and they've gotten all the recommended labs. There's always something else that their doctor isn't checking. So we go over that together. We'll also discuss, how to track ovulation to know if you're ovulating and when you're in your fertile window, and then what to consider once you do get pregnant, and those next steps to maintain a healthy pregnancy. Now, on last week's Friday Chats episode, I talked about some red flags you should look for to know if your doctor is or isn't in your corner in terms of really getting the support you need for your PCOS. So many of you reached out over the weekend to basically say like SOS, what I described is pretty much exactly what they had experienced either in the past or currently with their doctor. So if you're looking for help from a PCOS expert who actually believes in you and wants to see you succeed and wants to see you feel your best, the link to join is in my bio, or you can also schedule a discovery call if you'd like to learn more and if you need help determining, is this the right fit for you? So during that phone call, we'll discuss your health goals when it comes to PCOS. I'll answer any questions you have about the program, and then we'll kind of determine, is this something that will really allow you to be successful? Now, second and last update is to remind you of our April giveaway. So to win, to be entered to win, you'll have to leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen, and then share the podcast on Instagram and tag me at Dr. Danielle _ND. So you can be entered to win once a week. So if you post the podcast once a week in April, there's 4 weeks in April, that's 4 entries to win. And the winner will get to choose between either a one-on-one virtual consult with me or a swag bag with all my favorite wellness products. The winner will be chosen at the end of the month. All right, enough with the updates. Let's get to the good stuff. Today, we are covering the ovulatory phase. Now, the ovulatory phase is really technically one day, but you can start to think about incorporating these things a few days before and a few days after ovulation, especially if you're not really clear on exactly when you're ovulating, right? Like if you don't know if you're ovulating on day 13 or day 15, it's okay. You can start to kind of think about syncing your diet and your exercise with the ovulatory phase around that time. So what is happening during the ovulatory phase? So if you remember back from last week when we talked about the follicular phase, we know that estrogen and LH at this point are the highest they're going to be. An egg is in the ovary and it's currently sitting in a sac of tissue. Now, remember back during the follicular phase, our brain made a hormone called LH, which then triggered or signaled to the ovary, hey, it's time to release the egg. It's time to ovulate. So that brings us to where we're at now, the ovulatory phase. And once that LH spikes, then it's going to trigger that egg to be released. So the egg is released from that sac of tissue. It travels from the ovary down the fallopian tube to the uterus. Now, that sac of tissue that was once holding the egg, this is important because that sac of tissue is now called a corpus luteum. Probably more scientific than we need to be, but I still like to share this part because this tissue is so important. Once we ovulate, this tissue is going to start making progesterone. Progesterone, also known as the pregnancy hormone. So I want you to remember this. We're going to come back to it. So the egg travels to the uterus, and at this point, a few things can happen. So number one, maybe the egg never comes in contact with the sperm. So it enters the uterus, it hangs out there for about 2 weeks. Our body senses that we're not pregnant, so progesterone levels drop. And when the progesterone levels drop, then that lining of the uterus, that endometrial lining, is going to start to shed, and we get our period, and the egg will be released at the same time. That's scenario one. Scenario two is that the egg does come in contact with the sperm, and it implants or attaches to the wall of the uterus. Now, our ovaries are going to sense this. It's going to say, okay, something is happening in the uterus. So the ovaries are going to continue to make more and more progesterone. The goal being that the ovaries can make enough progesterone until around week 10 of the pregnancy, when the placenta has developed enough to take over making progesterone. Because remember, what happens when progesterone levels drop? We get our period. So if an embryo attaches to the wall of the uterus and progesterone levels drop, either maybe they drop before the placenta can take over making progesterone, or maybe for whatever reason the placenta is not making enough progesterone, then what's going to happen? That lining of the uterus is going to shed, and now the embryo can no longer be attached to the uterus wall, and that is going to be lost as well. So really, we want to focus on, is that egg implanting? Is that embryo implanting? But also, do we have enough progesterone to make sure it stays there? Now, the rise in progesterone during this phase is going to cause our body temperature to increase about 0.5 degrees. So one way to track if and when you're ovulating is to take something called your basal body temperature. This means your temperature is being taken first thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up, before you get out of bed, before you drink water, before you move around, right away. And you're using a thermometer that's specifically for basal body temperature. And you should be able to see a distinct difference in temperature before ovulation and after ovulation. So say your baseline temperature is 97 degrees. When you ovulate and you start making progesterone, now you're at 97.5, 97.6, and then it should continue to stay around that 97.6 mark. If you're trying to get pregnant, you want to stay elevated, basically forever throughout pregnancy. But if you get your period and you're not trying to get pregnant, we would expect to see that temperature stay around 97.6. And then once your progesterone drops, that temperature is going to drop. And this can be really helpful because there's something called a luteal phase defect, which is essentially when your progesterone drops too soon. So if you're tracking your basal body temperature every day and you see that your temperature goes up to that 97.6, but it's only there for about 4 or 5 days and then it drops, that is a good indicator that your body is struggling to make enough progesterone. And I hope by now you're seeing why it's so important to have good progesterone levels in order to support a pregnancy. And really, that progesterone production is going to primarily start after ovulation. And I think that this can be confusing for people because a lot of times women are given progesterone to trigger a period, especially with PCOS. If you haven't had a period for a while, your doctor might prescribe progesterone to trigger that. Sometimes your doctor might say, okay, take this every month to trigger a period. And that can give you a false sense of security of, oh, I'm taking progesterone. I know my progesterone was low in the past, so this must be helping. I'm bleeding every month, so this is great. Like everything is kind of functioning the way it should be. But what was the underlying reason for having low progesterone and having irregular cycles in the first place? It was that you were not ovulating. Is taking progesterone going to make you ovulate? No. So even though I do recommend taking progesterone to trigger your period, if you haven't had a period in 3 to 4 months, I typically don't recommend taking it every month, especially for my patients when we're working together to really get them ovulating on their own. In order for us to be able to see, okay, what's working? When are you actually getting your cycle back on your own? It's better for them not to be taking this progesterone that's going to be impacting when they're bleeding. That's if they're not ovulating. Now, on the flip side of that, if we know they're ovulating and we know the issue is just that they're not making enough progesterone, then yes, we may supplement with progesterone, especially if they are trying to get pregnant or if they have a history of miscarriage. So you can see how every individual is different. There's different circumstances for when you should be taking certain things and when you shouldn't. I just think it's important to understand that taking progesterone is not making you ovulate. Okay, another sign of ovulation that you might see during the ovulatory phase is egg white cervical mucus. So essentially this is a discharge and it's going to look similar to if you were to crack an egg and there's that clear, really slippery egg white consistency. That is a good sign that you have fertile mucus. You may also have mild cramping and spotting. I want to put a PSA that extreme cramping during ovulation is not normal. Mild cramping, yes. Extreme, no. And then ovulatory predictor kits, OPKs, are also used to determine if you're ovulating during the ovulatory phase. Now, I'm going to be diving more into this on our Friday Chats episode this week. All right, so let's get into, during the ovulatory phase, how can you expect to feel? Around this time, libido is going to be highest, right? And that makes sense. Like it's kind of just innately in us. If this is our time where we can get pregnant, libido is going to be highest, kind of help drive that. Motivation and creativity are also going to be highest. You're going to feel maybe more social and more productive. So this is really your time to schedule maybe parties. If you have like a birthday party or work party coming up, maybe you have a presentation, maybe you have a work project that you need to do. Maybe you're going on vacation with a group of friends. This would be a great time to do that. And again, it's not always possible, but understanding that if you do these things around the ovulatory phase, you may find that you just feel better overall. What you don't want to do, which is sometimes what I do, is commit to some big social activity when you're on your ovulatory phase, but the social activity isn't taking place for another 2 weeks, because menstrual phase you may not be as social as ovulatory phase you. And that's something I do all the time. I'm like, oh yes, this sounds like a great plan. And then 2 weeks roll by and I'm in a completely different phase of my cycle. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to do that anymore. All right, so that's kind of what you can expect to feel and kind of how you can sync your life with that phase. Now, as far as food goes, we've been talking about seed cycling, and around the ovulatory phase, this is going to be the time to switch seeds. So during the ovulatory phase, we're going to switch away from flax and pumpkin seeds, and we're switching to sesame seeds and sunflower seeds. And again, if you missed the seed cycling episode with the CEO and founder of Funk It Wellness, go back 3 weeks and you can listen to that and listen to, what is seed cycling? What benefits can you expect from it? And why does it work for people? Now, during the ovulatory phase, eating fresh fruits and vegetables, this is important all the time, but especially during the ovulatory phase, because these foods are going to be rich in nutrients like magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin B6, which are all going to help support progesterone production as we transition from the ovulatory phase into the luteal phase. So think big salads with lots of colors, fresh smoothies, maybe frozen or fresh fruits, maybe throwing in some spinach as well, but really thinking fresh food, fresh fruit and vegetables midway through your menstrual cycle. Now, not to sound like a broken record, again, we're going to keep it very surface level for the supplements, but something that's typically pretty well tolerated, doesn't have many side effects, is pretty hard to overdo it on, is vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 helps with progesterone production, which is going to improve PMS symptoms. Oftentimes, PMS symptoms are due to either high estrogen levels or low progesterone levels, or some sort of combination of the two. So B6 can help to support progesterone levels to improve PMS. It's also going to be really important if you are trying to get pregnant. So with vitamin B6, sometimes I'll have people take it every day throughout their cycle. Other times I'll have them just take it starting at ovulation until their period. I prefer, to take supplements as little as possible. One, it's, financially better if you're not taking supplements that you don't need, certain days of the week or certain days of your cycle that you don't actually need them during. But also, just that you don't feel like you're eating like a meal worth of supplements every day. So typically I say, start with 2 weeks worth of the B6 before your cycle, do that for a few cycles. If you feel like that's not quite getting you to where you want to go, then increase it to every day. Now, I definitely have some patients who, have other things going on symptom wise, or, maybe their labs are showing, a certain progesterone level where it's like, okay, you actually really would benefit from taking this every day. All right. And then movement during the ovulatory phase. This is the peak of your energy. So this is the time for your most challenging forms of exercise. So we were kind of gearing up for these types of exercise during the end of the follicular phase. Things like boxing, biking, more advanced Pilates classes, longer hikes, hot yoga. This is your time. So really harnessing that energy, like I had said last episode, if you are somebody who's like, I need to run or I need to do HIIT, then this is going to be the time to do it. This is also going to be the time to lift heavier weights, especially if you're training for something. So using your energy to your advantage during the ovulatory phase. All right. That pretty much wraps up that. The ovulatory phase is, like I said, pretty much one day. So short and sweet, but you can start to incorporate these things, especially at the tail end of the follicular phase and at the very start of the luteal phase. You're still going to feel that energy, that motivation, that productivity. So you can kind of elongate it just a bit. Next week, we are finishing off this series with the luteal phase, which I think maybe is the most important phase because I think it's where most women struggle the most when it comes to either having PMS symptoms, or if they're struggling to get pregnant because their progesterone is dropping too soon during the luteal phase. So definitely tune in for that. Don't forget, we only have 2 weeks left for this April giveaway, so make sure you leave a review, share on Instagram, and tag me. And then for our Friday Chats episodes, if you have any requests in terms of short questions you want answered during those Friday Chats episodes or topics you want to see covered, shoot me a DM. I'd be happy to share that on the podcast. I'm sure if you have a question, there are probably many, 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 many other women who have the exact same question. All right. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you on Friday.